My name is Norman Chafee. I came here not knowing what I was getting into, but very excited about the idea of being in the manned space program because I had always, as a youngster, been a science fiction nut. I dreamed about and read about and thought about going into orbit, going to the moon, going to Mars. But I knew that was fun to think about, fun to dream about. You could read articles in Collier's magazine by a German fellow named Werner von Braun about big space stations and things like that. But I knew that was science fiction, was not science fact. And all of a sudden, on October the 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union did something that changed everyone's output. They put up Sputnik, and it didn't do anything except go around the Earth. It was a basketball-sized satellite with 4 little trailing antennas, and it went around the Earth at about 350 miles altitude, and all it did was go beep, 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 beep. But when you interpreted that beep, 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 what that said was, look what the Soviet Union can do and what you can't. And so that turned on an effort that resulted in a very, very robust United States space program, the need for a human space flight program, and the selection of Houston, Texas as the site for the Manned Spacecraft Center. I was very familiar with Houston because I had done my undergraduate work at Rice University here in Houston. I was a chemical engineer student, fully intended to go into the petrochemical business. Went back to northern Oklahoma, where I'm from, and went to the University of Tulsa for my master's degree in chemical engineering, specializing in petroleum design and refining, and actually went to work for a refining company in northern Oklahoma for just a very few months when there was a competition amongst all the U.S. cities to see where the Manned Spacecraft Center should be located. And after a very detailed consideration of all of the cities that applied, that raised their hands and said, oh, we can do this, we can do this, there was a selection process put together by the United States Space Council, which was chaired by Lyndon Johnson from Texas, and its chief officer was a congressman whose name I can never remember when I try to talk about it, but he was the local congressman from Houston. And after a very complete but fair evaluation of all of the competing cities, Houston was selected. And Rice University may have been complicit because they donated the land. When they found out that was illegal, they gave the land to ExxonMobil, who donated the land to the government. So this stuff's been going on forever. But when I heard about that, I said, I've got to be part of this. I called them up and said, I'm the world's best chemical engineer, and have you got something for me? And they said, well, we might. Why don't you come on down? So my wife and I and a little 4-month-old brand new little girl came down here in the middle of May 1962 and been here ever since. And so that's 56 years and counting. For me, they did quit paying me in 1998, and I went to work for contractors for a number of years, primarily working in education outreach kinds of things. And then about 5 years ago, I just said, hey, I'm tired of coming to dumb meetings and writing activity reports, and I'll just do whatever you want for me at no cost, unless I don't want to. And so they said, that sounds good. So that's the agreement we've got now. But I rarely have a conflict where I can't come down. And Margaret is always, and liftoff is always at the top of my list. And you'll be back in a couple of weeks with some students that I'll be down here talking. So every year I'm a little slower and a little more stooped, everything, but my enthusiasm does not wane. So, and luckily I'm one of the old men who worked on this thing who can still remember, who's still living, and can still remember how it all worked. So I'm gonna tell you about the Saturn V. We've got another big launch system in the works called the Space Launch System. Some of you may have looked that up. You may even be part of your agenda during the week. It will be bigger than the Saturn V in its biggest format, and it'll be an amazing thing. I'm hoping to hang around until they get that first flight into launch. So you'll have to pardon me. I have to use some cheater cards because I can't remember all the darn numbers that are in the handout that I gave you. But this vehicle you're looking at would have been Apollo 18. The program stopped by President Nixon after the Apollo 17 flight. This was at Kennedy getting ready to be stacked for Apollo 18, which would have flown in April of 1973, when Nixon, for political reasons, said, you know, we have accomplished President Kennedy's goal. These things cost a lot of money. We have a very expensive standing army that has to be employed to service the things, to make sure everything goes right, to solve problems, to launch them, to get them back, all that kind of thing. I think I can better use that money doing something else. So congratulations, NASA. You've done the job. The program is over, and we're standing down. So that's what happened. There were 3 vehicles left at that time. This one would have been 18. There's one at Marshall, which would have been Apollo 19, and one at Kennedy, which would have been Apollo 20. Those 2 vehicles have been heavily scavenged for parts, so they have some stages and things that are mock-ups that are not real hardware. This vehicle is 100% authentic. It's had some of the guts taken out for moving internals that are not visible from the outside. You can move those to museums and things of that, like flight computers and fuel cells and that kind of stuff that you wouldn't be able to see anyway. But what you see today as we walk along is the authentic stuff. This vehicle is 363 feet long. The first 2 stages are 10 meters in diameter, which is a little over 33 feet. It weighs, when fully loaded with its propellants, a little over 6.8 million pounds. All 3 stages are expendable, meaning they perform their intended function, their use. When they're done with, we get rid of them so we don't carry dead weight any farther than we have to. Now they fall back, the first 2 stages fall back into the Atlantic Ocean. The 3rd stage either hits the moon or goes into orbit independently about the sun. The lunar modules stay on the lunar surface. The service module is burned up during re-entry, and the only thing that comes back is the little 12,000 pound command module at the far upper end, which we'll look at and talk about. So 6.8 million pounds leaves and 12,000 pounds comes back, and we leave a trail of used hardware around, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The thrust to weight ratio of this vehicle was relatively low. The total thrust of the first stage, these big five big F1 engines, is 7.6 million pounds. The weight is 6.8 million pounds. So the thrust is more than the weight, which is good. Otherwise, it doesn't go anywhere. But it's not that much greater. So the liftoff acceleration is rather low. And those of you that have seen movies of the Apollo launches can see that it's really what I call a rather majestic ascent. It's this huge big thing takes off and moves slowly. At first you see just a huge billowing cloud of steam which comes from the rocket exhaust hitting the water that's being sprayed on the launch tower to protect the concrete, and it makes this huge power of steam, and then in about 2 or 3 seconds you suddenly see the tip of the rocket come emerging up out of that cloud of steam and then heading up very slowly. It actually took 12 seconds for it to clear the launch tower. So I've got a nice clip of that on my computer. I get that out at least once a week and look at it and shake my head and say, well, Space Launch System is coming along. It's going to eclipse this, but this was something.